Lauren McAllister was a compassionate Canadian nurse searching for love, and Rajeev Khurana was the charming Indian man who promised her forever. But behind his perfect smile was a web of lies, a secret wife, and a deadly plan that would end in a horrifying double murder no one saw coming. In early 2022, Lauren McAllister, a 28-year-old trauma nurse from Ontario, Canada, joined a medical volunteer program in Mumbai. She had always been passionate about helping underserved communities and saw this trip as both a humanitarian mission and a chance to escape the monotony of her hospital's night shifts. It was in one of the crowded, bustling clinics of South Mumbai that she met Rajeev Khurana. He was introduced as a local healthcare consultant working with international NGO. Tall, well-spoken, and dressed sharply in tailored shirts, Rajeev immediately stood out among the volunteers and staff. Lauren found herself drawn to him almost instantly. He had a polished confidence, spoke fluent English, and appeared deeply involved in healthcare reform in India. They began talking during breaks, discussing everything from global health issues to personal philosophies. Rajeev told her he was building a network of diagnostic labs to make testing more accessible for poor communities. His knowledge of medical systems, combined with a warm demeanor and a disarming smile, made a strong impression on Lauren. To her, he seemed not only successful, but compassionate, a rare combination. As days turned into weeks, their friendship turned into something deeper. Rajeev started picking her up from the hostel, taking her to his favorite local cafes and scenic spots around the city. He spoke often of his dreams of moving abroad, of starting a family, and of escaping the bureaucratic grind of life in India. Lauren was captivated by how aligned their visions seemed. When her program ended after 6 weeks, the idea of saying goodbye to Rajeev felt unbearable. Back in Canada, they continued to talk daily over video calls. Rajeev sent her photos, love notes, and even a bracelet engraved with both their initials. Within 2 months, he proposed during a surprise visit to Toronto. He flew in on a visitor visa, claiming to have paused his work commitments in India just to see her. The gesture overwhelmed Lauren. She accepted immediately, convinced she had found her soulmate. The wedding was arranged quickly, a backyard event at her parents' home in Mississauga. Lauren's family was skeptical. Her father questioned Rajeev's intentions, but Lauren insisted it was real love. Her friends whispered their concerns about the rushed engagement, but she dismissed them. She believed she knew him better than anyone else. After the marriage, Lauren sponsored his spousal visa, allowing Rajeev to live and work in Canada while waiting for permanent residency. Within weeks, he moved into her apartment in downtown Toronto. Lauren helped him settle in, bought him new clothes, introduced him to her colleagues, and even handed over access to their joint account to help him get started. To everyone else, things looked like a fairy tale, a cross-continental love story that had beaten the odds. But what Lauren didn't know was that every moment had been carefully planned. The love, the charm, even the visit to Canada. None of it was spontaneous. Rajeev had a reason for everything, and the real story behind the romance was darker than she could ever imagine. Beneath Rajeev's charming exterior was a carefully constructed facade. He had grown up in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of New Delhi. His family had once been comfortable, but a series of poor financial decisions by his father had left them burdened with debt. Over the years, Rajeev watched as his parents fought to maintain appearances while sinking deeper into loans. By the time he was in his 20s, Rajeev had developed an obsession with wealth, success, and most importantly, escape. His education was average, and despite telling Lauren he was a medical entrepreneur, the truth was far less glamorous. He had worked briefly as a sales rep for a diagnostic supply company, but was fired after being caught falsifying invoices. From there, he drifted through short-lived business ventures, most of which ended in failure. But Rajeev had one undeniable strength. He knew how to sell a story. He could read people, mirror their emotions, and make them believe anything. It was a skill he used often, especially when it came to relationships. Back in India, Rajeev had married Ritika Sharma, a quiet and soft-spoken schoolteacher from a conservative family. Their marriage was arranged through a distant relative, and while it lacked passion, It provided Rajeev with financial relief. Ritika's father paid a sizable dowry and helped settle some of Rajeev's debts. Though Ritika hoped for a genuine partnership, Rajeev viewed her as just another transaction. Within months of their wedding, he grew distant. He started sleeping in a separate room, disappeared for days without explanation, and grew irritated whenever she asked about their future. When Rajeev met Lauren during the volunteer program, he saw an opportunity. Here was a foreign woman, independent, wealthy, and emotionally open. She was everything he needed to restart his life. He never told Ritika about her. Instead, he claimed he was traveling for work and cut off communication for weeks. Ritika, left alone in Delhi, assumed he was working hard to secure their future. She had no idea he was courting another woman thousands of miles away. Once married to Lauren and settled in Canada, Rajeev began his next phase. He convinced Lauren to co-sign a loan for what he described as a Canadian expansion of his diagnostic lab network. He spoke confidently about investors, partnerships, and future profits. Lauren, still caught in the spell of their whirlwind romance, trusted him completely. She withdrew money from her savings, opened a joint line of credit, and encouraged him to chase his dreams. But the money never went toward a business. Rajeev used it to pay off old debts in India, transfer funds to his brother, and fund a secret apartment he had leased under a fake name in Toronto. He had begun seeing other women, often targeting recent immigrants who, like Lauren, were seeking companionship and security. At the same time, Ritika began to grow suspicious. She hadn't seen Rajeev in nearly a year, and whenever she called, he avoided personal questions. She reached out to one of his cousins, who casually mentioned Rajeev's life in Canada. The puzzle pieces began to fall into place. Ritika's calls turned desperate, but Rajeev dismissed her with cold, rehearsed reassurances. Still, the walls were slowly closing in. Rajeev had built his life on deception, and it was only a matter of time before the truth would surface. What he didn't realize was that Lauren was already beginning to sense that something wasn't right. By late 2023, Lauren's world began to feel unstable. The man she had once believed was her soulmate now seemed like a stranger living under her roof. Rajeev had grown increasingly distant. He often left the apartment without explanation and took late-night phone calls in a language she didn't understand. When she asked him simple questions, like where he had gone or who he was speaking to, his answers were vague or defensive. He insisted she was being paranoid, but her instincts told her otherwise. Small but alarming details started piling up. One afternoon, while cleaning their shared desk, Lauren found 2 Indian passports tucked away in a drawer she rarely opened. One belonged to Rajeev, but the other was in the name of Ritika Khurana. Confused, Lauren Googled the name and found a few scattered social media profiles, all showing a young Indian woman, her face unfamiliar. One photo, dated 2 years earlier, featured Rajeev standing beside her at what looked like a traditional wedding ceremony. A cold knot formed in Lauren's stomach. She had never felt the need to spy on her husband before, but now she felt foolish for not questioning things sooner. She contacted a private investigator, someone a colleague had recommended discreetly. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing, not her friends, not her family. She needed confirmation before she accepted the possibility that her entire marriage was a lie. The investigator worked quickly. Within a week, he presented Lauren with a folder of findings. The truth was devastating. Rajeev was still legally married in India. The woman in the photos, Ritika, was his wife of 4 years. There were no diagnostic labs, no business ventures. Rajeev had never been an entrepreneur. He was unemployed, living off Lauren's income and credit. Even more disturbing were the financial transfers, large amounts wired to various accounts in India, some linked to Rajeev's family, others untraceable. Lauren stared at the evidence in silence. Everything, every word, every moment, had been built on deceit. She didn't cry. Instead, she felt numb. The betrayal was too deep for tears. She knew she couldn't stay silent. That night, she confronted Rajeev, laying out the documents in front of him. His face went pale, then hardened. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He simply walked out of the apartment and disappeared for 2 days. Lauren acted quickly. She filed for divorce, called immigration to report suspected fraud, and closed the joint bank accounts. She changed the locks and told her employer about what was happening, fearful that Rajeev might retaliate. Her friends, once skeptical of her whirlwind romance, now rallied around her with support. What Lauren didn't know was that her actions had set off a chain reaction. Back in India, Ritika had already discovered the truth, that Rajeev had married another woman, used her money, and lied about everything. Heartbroken and angry, she was now in contact with Rajeev again. But instead of confronting him with rage, she listened. Rajeev, always the manipulator, spun a new web of lies, convincing Ritika that Lauren was the villain. Their next move would not be about love or forgiveness. It would be about revenge. In the weeks following Lauren's confrontation, Rajeev spiraled into desperation. His carefully constructed double life had collapsed. His visa status was now under review, his financial access was gone, and the threat of legal consequences loomed. But what terrified him most wasn't the possibility of deportation. It was the thought of losing control. Control over Lauren, over Ritika, and over the narrative he had so carefully crafted in both their lives. When Rajeev returned to India briefly under the guise of settling unfinished business, his true purpose was far more sinister. He needed Ritika, not for love but for leverage. He knew she was broken, confused, and still emotionally tethered to him. He spun an elaborate story, claiming Lauren had tricked him into marriage, taken his money, and now sought to ruin his life out of spite. Ritika, already humiliated by his betrayal, struggled to separate truth from lies. But Rajeev was persuasive, using guilt, pity, and half-truths to pull her back in. In just a few weeks, he convinced Ritika to travel with him to Canada. He promised her a new beginning, told her that he'd fix everything, and that Lauren had always been a threat to their happiness. Ritika, isolated from friends and family, followed him. She entered Canada on a tourist visa and was smuggled into a rental basement apartment under a false name. Rajeev didn't allow her to contact anyone, keeping her hidden and feeding her stories that stoked her anger and confusion. Together, they started planning. Rajeev was determined to confront Lauren and reclaim what he believed he was owed: money, power, and dignity, but his version of confrontation was far from rational. He wanted revenge, and Ritika, now fully entangled in his distorted sense of justice, agreed to help. They rented an Airbnb in a quiet suburb outside Toronto, using a fake profile and cash payment. Rajeev messaged Lauren, claiming he wanted to return important documents and discuss the divorce civilly. Despite her better judgment, Lauren agreed to meet. She didn't go alone. Her best friend, Emily Tran, accompanied her. Emily had been Lauren's closest confidante through the ordeal and refused to let her face Rajeev alone. On the night of the meeting, Lauren and Emily arrived just after sunset. The house looked ordinary, with curtains drawn and lights dimmed. The moment they stepped inside, they realized something was wrong. There was no paperwork, no discussion, just silence, and then chaos. Rajeev attacked first, catching Lauren off guard. Ritika emerged moments later, armed with a kitchen knife. The confrontation turned violent in seconds. Lauren tried to fight back, but the assault was frenzied and calculated. Emily attempted to call for help, but Ritika struck her down before she could reach her phone. The violence was quick, brutal, and deeply personal. By the time it was over, both women were dead. Their bodies were wrapped in plastic, dragged into the trunk of a rental car, and dumped near a frozen riverbank 2 hours north of the city. Rajeev and Ritika returned to the Airbnb, cleaned the scene with bleach and gloves, and vanished before sunrise. What they didn't realize was how many digital traces they had left behind. Surveillance footage, credit card logs, and phone pings would soon unravel the horrific act they thought they had buried. The discovery of Lauren and Emily's bodies 2 days later sent shockwaves through the community. A local fisherman stumbled upon a bundle near the banks of the frozen Rouge River. At first glance, it looked like trash, but the unmistakable outline of a human limb visible through the torn plastic sent him running to call the authorities. Within hours, police had cordoned off the area and launched a false scale homicide investigation. The forensic team quickly identified the victims. The brutality of the murders shocked even seasoned investigators. Lauren had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and face, while Emily had severe head trauma and defensive wounds. What stood out most was the calculated effort to conceal the crime, bodies wrapped meticulously, no weapons left behind, and traces of bleach used to wipe away evidence. It wasn't a random act, it was planned. Detectives began piecing together Lauren's recent life, starting with her recent divorce filing and the complaint she had submitted to immigration officials about Rajeev's fraudulent marriage. The moment his name came up, it became the focal point of the investigation. When they checked the Airbnb booking records, they found a reservation made under an alias, but the payment had been linked to a prepaid debit card purchased near Rajeev's apartment. Surveillance footage from the Airbnb neighborhood showed a man resembling Rajeev entering the home with a woman who matched Ritika's description. Within 48 hours, a Canada-wide warrant was issued for both Rajeev Khurana and Ritika Sharma. But they were already on the run. Rajeev had driven west, staying off major highways and using burner phones. They were spotted at a gas station in Winnipeg, where a sharp-eyed cashier recognized them from a news alert. The tip helped police trace their path, and within a day, officers located them at a motel near the Saskatchewan border, just miles from a remote forested area where they had planned to cross on foot into the United States. Both were arrested without incident. Ritika was trembling, visibly shaken and disoriented. Rajeev, on the other hand, appeared calm and composed, as if he had accepted his fate. During interrogation, he remained mostly silent, refusing to answer questions. Ritika, however, broke after just a few hours. Exhausted, frightened, and riddled with guilt, she confessed to everything: Rajeev's lies, their plan, and the details of the murders. The trial was one of the most followed in recent Canadian history. Prosecutors painted Rajeev as a master manipulator, a man who used charm and deception to exploit two women, one for citizenship, the other for loyalty. Ritika, portrayed as a victim of psychological control, pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder in exchange for a reduced sentence and her testimony against Rajeev. Rajeev was found guilty of first-degree murder and received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Ritika was sentenced to 25 years, with eligibility for parole after 15. The courtroom was filled with Lauren and Emily's grieving family and friends, who listened silently as the judge described the killings as calculated, heartless, and utterly senseless. In the aftermath, Lauren's family established a foundation in her name focused on educating others about immigration fraud and the hidden dangers of coercive relationships. What began as a seemingly romantic international love story had ended in a brutal double homicide, revealing how manipulation and obsession can turn love into a weapon and trust into a death sentence.